Hello, hello. It's your girl, Jasmine O, and welcome to the conversation of Two Can Play That Game. Listen, if you've ever wondered about the game of love and whose rules to play by, then you're in the right place today. Today, we have some awesome guests joining us. First, we have Dr. Evelyn, the founder and president of Dr. Evelyn Ministries. She's been in ministry for over 30 years and has a wealth of knowledge in counseling and has had the opportunity of seeing different types of relationships during her time in ministry. So welcome, Dr. Evelyn.
Hello.
Awesome. And we also have with us Scott and Emily. Listen, they are some great relationship experts, coaching. I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves, but we're so excited to have them here with us. Hi, Scott. Hi,
Hello.
Emily.
Hello. Thank you, Jasmine. My name is Scott Holden, and this is my wife, Emily. We've been married for over 15 years, and during that time, we've had the unique opportunity to grow through peaks and valleys. And we've done that in the context for us of really strong relationships. So relationships for us aren't something, they're everything. And then during the pandemic, what we ended up doing was we really felt like God was calling us to start a relationship coaching business. And we call it Project Roots and Wings. And that comes from a quote by Johann von Goethe. And it says that the purpose of a parent, and we've taken that to be the purpose of a coach or a pastor or a teacher, is to give their children or their people that are with them roots and wings. And so for us, that really just resonated with us. And so we've been doing that for a while now. And we have a podcast, also the Project Roots and Wings podcast. And so we just, our heart and our desire is to help people to gain the tools, the insights, the principles, the attributes, so that they don't have to experience some of the things that we experienced early in our marriage. And that's really what we're about.
Awesome.
Ditto. I don't know that I would add a whole lot. Scott did a great job introducing. We're just honored to be here, honestly, to be able to share our story.
Yeah, very honored.
And we hope that, God just uses this time.
Amen. I'm excited too. So I guess the first question that I will ask is, what is love, right? So like in one word, what would you say love is? If it had to summarize everything that you know of love. So we could just think about it. And maybe I'll start with Dr. Evelyn. What would you say love is?
I think what I'll say, you said one word, right?
Love.
Okay, love is selfless.
That's so good.
That's
Yes.
good.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Emily?
I know.
Go.
Selfless is a good one. I was thinking growth, and I could expand on that, but I think that ties back into the selfless side of it as well.
Yeah. I'm a rule breaker.
I know, he's
so
used
I'm
more
gonna
than
use
one.
more word. Because I
Just
think
warning you.
this will set up the context for kind of the rest of our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
Is that love for me is when I think of myself less often
Mm-hmm.
and think of the other more often.
Mm-hmm.
So back into that context of selflessness. But I think it's so much texture to it that for me is love.
That is a great, I feel like everybody gave everything that ties into it.
Yeah.
And definitely love is not just one word,
Yes.
but to hear selfless growth and less of me and more of the other person, we live in a society that is opposite of that.
Yes.
It's more of me. It's more about me.
Yes.
So in finding love is when you have people who have that kind of mindset, not everybody, but where's our standard? What are we looking at when we have, if I'm an author and I feel like, love should be putting yourself first and taking care of you and making sure the other person comes along and they agree to what you're saying and what you want to do, then that's love, or that's a good, healthy relationship. Where am I getting my information from?
Yeah.
Where's my standard? Where's my guide?
That's a great question. That's so good.
Because that's kind of tough. Anybody?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you want to I guess one thing that comes to my mind, honestly, so for us, the Bible is a starting place. That's central to who we are and our faith and our marriage. And it wasn't always that way, but it is now. And I know a lot of the scripture is used at almost every wedding is 1 Corinthians 13. And I think that if you really reflect on what that is, we were talking about this even in the car a little bit, that love is a verb, right? So love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy. And so I think that because love is so complex, to put it down to one thing or one feeling really limits it. That it is much bigger than that. And that's kind of why I thought of the word growth, because as you're growing and doing all these things, you are changing, you are being shaped. And so for me, that's a starting place of, what is love outside of God being love, which is even bigger than that.
Yeah. Dr. Evelyn, do you have anything that you'd like to say on that one?
And I think to add to what you said, of course, the source and the standard is God's word. But I know that sometimes some people struggle with that. They are like, well, the Bible was written several thousands of years ago. So how can that be relevant in our everyday life? But if we believe that we have a creator, and every creator has a manual. And so if Mercedes has a manual for their car, and then you decide, well, I want to use Nissan's manual to manage my Mercedes, you will be in big trouble. So God, who made us, gave us the manual, the Bible. And I think that it's very relevant. And part of what we are doing today is to make it relevant. So you see that the Bible is applicable in our existence right now.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think for me, I think this dovetails so well is that, as Emily shared, it hasn't always been this way for us. And one of the things that we learned in this process of kind of coming into this really holistic idea of love, for us really did come from the Bible. And I went to college. I have degrees and all those other things. And what that did was it gave me the tools to study. It gave me the understanding that while the Bible may have been written over a long period of time, if you go back to the Old Testament thousands of years and thousands, and to the New Testament a couple thousand years ago, there's still principles that speak to us today. And if we have ears to hear and a humility to listen, I think regardless of where you are on the spectrum of belief, there are concepts that you can take from there. And those concepts, those principles, form you in such a way that you become a better lover, a better friend, a better husband, a better wife, a better son, a better daughter. And all of that for us is in the context of relationships. And for us, we call that the church. So it's not just the Bible alone. It's a healthy, vibrant community of faith that challenges us to grow and disciples us to maturity.
I love what you said about principles that can still be applied. And I think that was one thing that I got growing up from my parents. Because a lot of times you feel like, yes, the Bible is there, but in today's world or in today's age, like it's really hard to have those type of relationships. But one thing that I guess my studying of the Bible that was different, or when I would sit down with my dad and do Bible study and stuff like that, it was just showing how even in middle school, my dad was talking to me about relationships. And some of my friends thought it was kind of weird. I remember when I turned 15, my mom was like, start praying for your husband. And I was like, okay, that's weird. But it wasn't in the fact of like marriage being the goal, but just
Right.
the type of
Correct.
person.
Yes.
And then I
Yes.
just remember her taking that a step further. In like a couple of weeks, we were studying from the book of Ruth and what a type of godly man is supposed to look like and what God's expectation of a spouse and all of that. So I had that understanding. And that is the standard that I date with. But not everybody has that. And sometimes you just feel like, okay, I know the Bible says this, but I guess another question that I will ask is, you know, in the Bible, we see that God created Adam and, you know, he placed him in the garden and he was there, but then God created Eve, right? So she didn't have to go looking for Adam or anything, right?
It was right there.
It was there, you know, she was placed. Her eyes were open.
She didn't have a choice. No.
That's another point. Her eyes were open and there he was. And he was like, whoa, okay.
Whoa.
We always, whoa, man.
Whoa,
woman.
right. So like in today's world, if we want to take that principle, how can we apply that as maybe some who are watching who are singles? Where are we supposed to go find, you know, godly men and women, you know, because it's hard because sometimes you go to a church and it's 300 women there to like 150 men or vice versa, but that never happens.
Yeah,
Rarely
but
anymore,
that's true. It's a very real statistic.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, how do you find, if we want to apply Bible principles, how do we find, you know, a person to even start that conversation of dating?
That's a great question.
So
That's a great question.
That is a great question.
Yeah. And I think to give a little bit response to that, from what Scott said, part of the standard when you are part of a church, as you build relationships, as we relate to each other, we get to know people on a personal level. And as you said, if you already have the values that maybe your parents have taught you as you are relating, you are looking at all the eligible young men or for the men, young women and saying, Emily can be a choice. Jasmine can be an option. But it doesn't mean you go chasing every one of them. But you are observing, you are praying and trusting the Lord. And in the appropriate time, you would be able to make that move. So church is one place. And then I will also add, because sometimes for believers, we also get so boxed in church, but there are other avenues. Let's for some of them who are professionals, there are all these professional associations, and there are believers there too. You wouldn't know until you go there.
So true.
And so you have to be active in the community, join the professional associations, volunteer, and do some community work. And whilst you are busy, who knows what will come out of that?
I agree. Emily, go ahead.
I think that's so good. I'm going to take a step back to answer the question, and then I'm sure Scott will kind of wrap it up. That's usually what we do. But I think exactly piggybacking off of what you're saying, values, right? So your dad at 15 talked to you about character and all these other things, values, principles that were important. I think that before you're even getting into a place of looking for someone, it's important to know who you are individually. Because I think a lot of times people, when they're searching for someone, they're looking for someone. It's that horrible Jerry Maguire movie that they want somebody to complete them. And in reality, that's not what we're called to be. We're called to be whole before we come into a relationship. And so I think that is the place before you even get into the question of who can I be looking at. I think that the singles out there need to ask themselves, do I know who I am? And my values and my beliefs and what I like to do, what I like to stand for, because then, to your point, yes, you might find that person at church, you might find that person in volunteering and in jobs, because you don't have to agree. Like Scott and I we have commonalities of things we like to do, but we also have things that we like to do on our own as well. And I think that's very healthy in that sense. But you might find somebody when you're out hiking, you might, like if that is whatever is important to you, but you have to know, who am I before you even take that step.
Yeah. And I think for me, I'm reminded of, I think that it's appropriate when Emily brings up that scene out of Jerry Maguire. And there's, unfortunately, that's the context within which we understand love. Is
Right.
the sense of I'm not whole until I find my spouse. But if we're honest, and when we read the Bible, Paul makes marriage the secondary position.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I wish you were single like I am, but because of this.
Yeah.
And that doesn't devalue marriage.
Right.
It just says that if I'm single. And it wasn't until really recently that we began to do some historical understanding of what it means to be single in this context.
Yeah.
And and so we're going to go back. For me, everything revolves around the church because that's who we're called to be. The church radicalized singleness and said, you don't have to get married to up your social status, to have children, to become better, to do all this stuff. Once again, it doesn't devalue marriage. It's saying that if I'm okay with who I am, and I know what my values are, what my vision is, what my mission is, the principles that I live by that are non-negotiable, I'm okay right where I'm at. Bloom where you're planted was what my grandma always used to say. Bloom where you're planted. And I think that, so when I look at all of that, where do we find? I think if you make yourself the best possible version of yourself, in the context of a woman who does that, there will be a man who says, whoa, man.
Yeah.
It's a standard joke around our house.
Yeah, it is.
And then I think on the female perspective, it's, wow.
Yeah, that person knows.
That person knows who they are. And then you become attractive internally and it's reflected externally. And I think secondary to that is we tend to reverse that.
Yeah.
So we want to look at the external first.
Yeah.
And then it makes it really hard because even if you're in church, the person who may not be 6 foot, has a 6-pack, drives a Bentley, whatever context you want to talk about, may look like they're appealing, but then you get to know them and you realize that they're really shallow. But then that person who's, they're, maybe they they work out and they take care of themselves, they eat real well, they're intellectual, they speak really well. That may be the person. And so we just need to, and that's where values come in.
Yeah.
I was long-winded there, but that's...
No, that was really great. Like your garden.
So I guess what we're trying to say that before you find,
Yes.
make sure you've dealt with your issue.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You are ready
Yes.
before you start looking.
Yes.
Of course. 'Cause
Cheers to that.
there's no Jerry Maguire over here.
Yes.
God completes you.
Yes.
And then you are whole within yourself and then you step out.
Yes.
But your garden can be church. Your garden can be an activity, like knowing who you are really. And I like that. My mom used to say, nobody's gonna come home and find you. I'm a homebody.
Yeah.
I can stay home. I don't, I don't need to go anywhere. But she would always say, like, no, they don't know you're in the house. Like nobody's gonna come here. That's breaking and entering.
Yeah.
That would be breaking and entering. Yes.
So you need to go out there. But even in the things that I like to do, and when I do go out, I definitely see that. Like if you're feeling good about yourself, whole within yourself, you do reflect that. And those around you in those environments will find that. So, we're whole, we're finding ourselves, and we're in the right garden. And we, meet that Adam or that Eve, right? Who sets the pace of a relationship? Because society would tell you, be courageous and just step out. And laid the law, let him know or let her know that this is what you're doing. So who sets that pace? And I want to direct this question to Scott.
Yeah. Oh my.
Okay.
Take a sip.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if my answer will be surprising, but it may be a little bit counter to a lot of people's thoughts. Because my philosophy and how we model our marriage is that there have been times in this relationship where God has spoken clearly and Emily has had the direction. And I, because of how we view love, I'm able to say, yes, that is the Lord speaking through you. And she has set that pace. And then there have been times where it's been the other way around. And so for us, what we've seen is that when we operate out of that place of wholeness, we value one another, we have really great communication, then what ends up happening is the pace is natural.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so I'm a retired runner. But when I was running, I would always look at my pace and I would always set my pace by somebody who was just a little bit faster than me because it stretched me to run just a little bit out of my comfort zone. And I think that's the same in relationships. We have to be willing to be out of our comfort zone. So if your comfort zone is, it's always me setting the pace, that's fine. But be able to have a great conversation with the person you're with, whether that's a friendship, a relationship, a marriage, communication matters. And that for me would be,
So you would say, I like how you're saying that. Would you say that applies to being married outside of when you first start dating, or is it the same?
That's a good question.
That is a great question. I think if I look back and try to remember as faithfully as I can,
It's
been a while.
It has.
I think that's always been for us one of the central principles of our dating engagement into married life was that we always tried to communicate from a place of saying, this is what I feel like we're supposed to do. This is the way I think we're supposed to go. And that's in the broadest sense.
Yeah.
So in the just in the general sense, it applies there as well. That we just kind of, it's not a laissez-faire attitude. It's very intentional. Because of that intentionality, we're able to really pick up on each other's, what's happening, what's going on, and stuff like that.
And I think,
Go ahead. I wanted to just ask, and you can speak, answer after this, but I just wanted to ask, when you first started to date, who made who know like they were interested, right? Because I think one of the questions that came with that was just like, okay, I've let a guy know that I'm interested. Do I now set the date? Like, do I now like, hey, we're going to meet up at the movies. Let's do this. Let's do that. Or am I doing the most? Society will say like, you're being brave. Or some people say, no, you need to sit back and let him take the lead because he's the man. So it's really great to hear that balance. And I definitely agree. And I think it comes into individuals who are secure within themselves, whole within themselves, and not feel like I don't have to be submissive in that negative connotation that it can be at times. But in dating, in engagement, and in marriage, what would you say for that?
I was the one who approached her.
I know, I was going to say he was.
But I think there was mutual attraction.
Correct.
So we knew that was the direction we wanted to go in. Now, if Emily came to me and said, hey, I'm attracted to you, what are your thoughts? I wouldn't have been offended by that. But I think I also would have said, let's pursue it this way.
Yeah.
But I think that there are we have friends that it wasn't that way. The woman was, I think aggressive is the wrong word. And that is the word that a lot of people will gravitate towards when they see that. For us, we have a lot of friends, and it was just simply the woman said, I really like you.
Interested in you.
I'm interested
Like,
in you. What are your thoughts? And then the man kind of came in and said, I have that too. Let's go forward.
Awesome.
And so I think it's, you have to, rigidity in this context is not our friend. And so we have to be able to have some flexibility here without compromising.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
No compromise of our values, principles, vision, mission, all of those things. I think we're good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the only thing, I love that the word pace was used. And I know that Scott referred to this earlier in terms of running, because I do look at relationships, in that sense of you're moving toward some type of goal. So I'm a long distance runner. I'm not fast, but I will go out and I will run, but I still have to know where I'm running to.
Yeah.
And so that's what, again, like whoever starts that motion, like Scott said, we've seen it both ways. In our relationship, he was the one that mentioned something. I came along, but I still had to know, where are we headed? Where is he headed? Where am I headed? Does that mesh? Because that's the other part. You come into relationship whole, that's great, but you might be set in your ways. And that is something that you have to start to see, how can God bring those things together to be even greater than what you could have done by yourself. So that's the only thing that I would add as well, is just like, there's been, if I again think of a long race, like he might be outpacing me for the first 5 miles, but then he gets tired and I'm pacing for the next 5. And it is kind of that give and take, but we still know where we're headed together.
Yep.
And Dr. Evelyn, would you say that can be a precursor, or I don't want to say a trait, maybe the right word. I don't have the right word, but can that be a positive or a negative in a relationship? Should that be something that you look at to determine if you want to continue in a relationship? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Yeah, it does. and thank you both. I really love what they shared, because I think that sometimes we get this whole concept of the man being the lead, the head of the house, and the woman submitting to the husband. We get it all mixed up.
Yes.
Yes, because when the Bible talks about the husband is the head of the home, and then you see that the Apostle Paul likens it to Christ and the church.
Yes.
Christ is also the head of the church. But when you look at the relationship of Christ and the church, it comes from the angle of love, of sacrifice, of selflessness, and things like that. So the headship, if we understand that concept, that the headship of the man is more coming from a loving, responsible, taking the lead and making sure that whether it's at the courtship level, marriage level, things are moving on smoothly. And you see that Jesus, in talking to the disciples, also talked about, he said, his kingdom is not like the kingdom of this world where they lord it, the rulers lord it over their subjects. So the headship of the man is not coming from an angle of, I'm the dominant person, I command you, sit here, and you don't have to open your mouth. If I don't want you relating to this person, you cannot talk to them. I'm the man. That it shouldn't come from that angle. And so you see that from what Scott and Emily shared, that when you have that understanding, it's very easy for you to say, hey, Emily, I think you have it this time. Or Scott, I'll follow your lead. So it kind of goes hand in hand.
So that great segue into gender roles, right? Because a lot of people, relationships have ended because of this discussion or lack of thereof. I'm Ghanaian, and in our culture is very, growing up in America, I would say, a lot of times it was hard for me in certain situations because I felt like My mom will come wake me up and say, "Oh, your dad is up, so you should make him breakfast." I'm sleeping. Like in my mind, I'm
Yes.
sleeping. If I'm up and I'm making breakfast, that's a different story.
Right.
But culture will say, like, no, as the young woman in the house, when people are up, you need to be up helping in the kitchen and things like that. At times it used to bring that rift, but my mom would always say that, even when you would get married in the future, you can't just not be concerned. Like it's Saturday morning, because I'm a night owl, so I go to bed at like 8 a.m. in the morning, but then my mom is up at like 2 in the morning. So it used to cause that I wasn't like understanding that. But as I got older and as I started dating and being around other people and seeing their situations, of course, again, having that principle from the Bible and understanding the role of a woman, and not in the sense of being you're less than, or you're underneath.
Yeah.
And understanding that, I noticed that not a lot of young people have this understanding. And when sometimes, some friends, or you go into like some connect groups and people are talking, that really becomes a hard thing of gender roles. And I love what you said about, sometimes it's Emily, sometimes it's me, but that communication is there.
Yes.
And so how can you establish that healthiness at the start of a relationship, even as you are married and growing in that? Is it a point of trust? Is it a point
That's
of,
good.
this is how I was raised and this is what we're going to do? And are we doing it how God intended it to be? If that question.
Sure. Yeah.
That.
I'm going to defer to Dr. Evelyn
Yeah.
to lead this part of it.
Well,
And then we'll come in.
I agree.
Okay. I think we started off by saying that the Bible is our standard.
Yes.
So we'll go by that standard.
Sure.
Sure.
And if we look into the Bible, we know that it says that let the older women teach the younger women how to be keepers at home and how to love their husbands.
Yes.
So I believe that keeping a home is fundamentally the work of the woman. And I tell my daughter, either you are doing it yourself or you are supervising somebody to get it done. Either way,
I received that.
either way, it must be done. You cannot say that, well, we are sharing in this thing, so I don't feel like the house should be clean. And that becomes, because that's a lot of the things that is going on out there. The young women today don't understand that after women sleep, we still have to be keepers at home. I have been a career woman my entire life. I was married for 34 years. On top of that, I was doing ministry work. I have young children that I was taking care of. But you can ask anyone who was close to me. I never relinquished my wifely duties, my motherly duties. I do everything. And like I said, one of the things that helps is to getting help.
Yes.
And planning ahead.
Yes.
You have to do a lot of planning.
Yes.
But having said that, a loving husband who is exemplifying Christ in the home will also want to help.
Yes.
They want to give that support.
Yes.
So sometimes you see that the wife is tired. Get that baby and feed the baby. I know husbands who say, honey, I need just sleep. I'll feed the baby throughout the night.
Yes.
And it's the right thing to do because the child was given to both of you.
Yes.
Or if you want to, and the young men listening, Valentine's Day, get a card for a cleaner who will come in and clean your entire
Amen.
We received
Yes.
that.
Just a gift card, they will say,
Yes.
is that what the maid, what's their name?
Molly maid or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they show up, what's happening? And they are,
What a gift.
yes, that would be a great gift.
Yes.
And I tell you, you will have a great celebration of Valentine's Day.
Yes, yes,
Well,
lots of reward from that. Yes, yes, yes.
Very important.
If you're married.
Yes.
So I believe it's our duty to ensure the home is kept, but then organize properly.
Yes.
And the husbands also need to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there have been situations, let's say, your wife has had surgery.
Mhm.
I've known some men, they will still insist, like culturally.
Yeah.
Well, you are supposed to be cooking, so I don't care what's going on with you.
Yeah.
That's un-Christ-like.
Yes. it
What
is.
would Jesus
Yeah.
have done?
That's good.
In fact, one of my favorite scriptures that I read is when Jesus rose up from the dead and he was grilling fish.
Yes.
And I said, Jesus grilled fish?
Yes.
And I was so blessed
Yes.
by
Yes.
that, you know. So
Yeah.
So good.
Be like
Yeah.
Christ and grill fish.
I
There you
really
go.
like the Lord
Quote.
Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's one of the first treats I'll say,
love
Lord,
that.
can you grill me some fish
Yes.
when I get to heaven?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know. You want to
You
start
know.
on this one, or
Yeah.
you want me to go in?
No, go for it. And
Okay.
I'll like
Yeah.
because we kind of come from a non-traditional, so I think
Yeah.
it'll be
Yeah. So for us, when we entered marriage, we had an understanding that we were in this together.
Mhm.
And I think, Dr. Evelyn, you put it so well,
Yes.
that whether they are culturally mandated or biblically mandated, there are roles that people fall into. And some people fall into them more naturally, and some people not so naturally. And then we have strengths as well.
Yeah.
And so I think I'll give an example, because I think the story will give really relevance to the points that we would want to make. Is 10 years ago we were trying to get pregnant, and we struggled with it. We had to do some things, but we ended up getting pregnant.
A miracle babies.
A miracle babies. And I did not want to be a father. I had no desire, because I had no relationship with my father or my stepdad at that for that instance. But when Emily came home and said, "Hey, we're pregnant," she surprised me with the announcement and stuff like that. I was like, okay, now we go. And then we went through the pregnancy, and I think there's a reason why it's set up for 9 months, 10 months technically. Because
That's very
it
true.
gives you a chance to acclimate, to work through the things you got to work through. When I saw our oldest son born, I used the analogy, and it's from Dr. Seuss's The Grinch. That day, my heart grew 3 times. And I really, truly learned what love was in that moment. We made a conscious decision through conversation that, just based on kind of where we were with her and her career, she is very good at what she does, and she had more opportunities for upward mobility than I did, that I would stay home and be a work from home dad. And started businesses. I was a personal trainer, I was a coach. And so this is something I've done my whole life. And we were very successful at it. It was good, but I got to stay home and impart to my children what wasn't imparted to me. And there was never a question whether that was okay or not. It was the best decision for us, based on when we read the Bible. This is what we understood. Because I do, when Paul says this to widows to disciple, is really the technical language that we would use here, younger women to do this. He also says and I think a really misquoted passage of Scripture, Ephesians 5. Everybody starts in verse 22.
And miss 21.
And miss 21. But
So
technically,
important.
they miss 5:1, because that's where the context is set. Because the context is set, life in the Spirit reaps these fruits. And then he talks about marriage towards the end of that chapter. 1 through 20 is a context for 21 through. And so for us, when we look at that text, it says, submit one to another out of reverence for Christ. And that brings back what Dr. Evelyn says, that Christ is my Father. or my father is my father. I think we get the Trinity's understanding. We don't want to go into that right now. But we understand that God is my Father. Jesus is my Lord. God is her Father. Jesus is her Lord. So our relationship and our interdependence on one another is ultimately in submission to Jesus.
Right.
And he is very plain when he says, I'm going to send you a helper. And that helper will convict you of sin and righteousness and all this other stuff. So when we're out of balance, the Spirit tells us that.
Yes.
Yep.
But we have made a conscious decision that she's working and I'm the stay-at-home dad. I have a relationship with my children that will set them up
For life.
success. And I have a relationship with my wife that I would not trade for the world. And if we were to trade roles, I don't even know what that would look like. But for us, it was fundamentally how we read the Bible. It was fundamentally how we interacted with our mentors and people that were discipling us, that we saw in the life of Jesus modeled. He knelt down, girded himself, and washed their feet. Now, we want to say that's just about foot washing. The principle in that is much stronger. And that's how we approach marriage. So for us, that's how gender roles are defined. We have strong rules. There's definitely things that I take the lead on spiritually. Like, we're going to pray right now.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there are times that Emily's like, this is what we're going to do. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that we listen to the Spirit of God in our lives.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if I'd add a lot. Like, honestly, he did a great job. I think it comes back to, and I know we've mentioned communication, and you even hit on this as well, that even if we're leading out of our strengths, some of my learnings have been like I love a clean house, right? So even though I get you, even though I'm a career woman, like I love a clean house, and it's not to say Scott doesn't, but there's just certain things. But I had to learn how to ask for help because that was such a key point. Even though that's my strength and my love, let me tell you, like we just even had this come up the other day. It was yesterday. I was exhausted, a long day of work. I came upstairs. He was exhausted. Both boys ended up being home, all day. And I asked him to cook dinner and he was water fasting. That was probably really mean. And he looked at me and I could just tell like that wasn't and I was going through my head of everything that needed to get done. And then instead I said, no, I need help. Can you actually run the errands here? And I'll cook dinner. And our night ended up being so much better instead of, I have to do all of this by myself. Yeah. So it's going to come down to that communication is really key. And at times, like Scott said, if we're off, we're not communicating. We're not on the same page. And we're sometimes not even just leading out of our strengths as well. And so that would probably be the only other additional thing I would add. But that's been our approach. And we understand it's a little different. And I came from a household where both of my parents worked, and Scott came from a household where it was mainly his mom and she worked 3 jobs, so it's culturally kind of what we're bringing into our marriage as well, which is another really important thing, that when you're bringing 2 people together, to have those conversations around expectations, and not just saying, well, this is how it was done in my house, or this. You guys have to find that compromise, and also what's going to work for you, and what your strengths are.
I hope you're listening because this is good. I mean, communication is so important, and as a millennial. It's I'm just a different kind of millennial. I'm just, I just say that to the glory of God. I'm just different. But a lot of people really have this mindset, like if you have certain conversations too soon, you're either doing the most or like, whoa, I wasn't talking about marriage. Where is this coming from? And I think, it goes back to what we said before, and making sure that you're, even as you get together and you're setting that pace between both male and female, that is it this is where he's headed and I am in agreement in that, or this is her expectations and it lines up with what I'm trying to do. So at what point, because, I've seen some people, I personally believe that when you meet somebody and you guys are kind of like on the same page and you're deciding that and all of that, to kind of find, coaches and if it's your pastor or counselors or professionals who you can sit down with and like, listen, we like each other. We want to take this a step further and we want you guys to coach us through certain conversations as we date.
Yes.
That's what I believe.
Yes.
Some people don't agree with that. They feel like that might be too soon or like that means we're getting married and I think it's not necessary. Like as you have these type of conversations, you realize, okay, maybe we do want separate things and the unwillingness to make it work. So let's just separate.
Yes.
Some people wait till they're engaged and everybody knows they're engaged. And now they're having these conversations. When is too soon? When is it, too late to have certain conversations? Because I think everything that has been said is very important to know in that kind of like foundation setting to help in what to expect as you're entering this journey. So when is too soon or too late for certain conversations? And anybody can jump in.
Yeah.
Mommy.
Ida.
Dr. Evelyn? I'm going to defer to wisdom.
You are the expert. I think that the earlier, the better.
Yes.
So you are not wasting anybody's time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. And you go ahead.
Yeah, the earlier, the better. So yeah,
Yeah.
very
That's it.
important.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
No, I think, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about just that wholeness and understanding who you are. And so again, if you're coming to the relationship understanding who you are, then those conversations can happen earlier.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people come into the relationship and they're still discovering who they are, that's where the hesitancy sometimes comes in because I don't know if they necessarily know where they're headed as well. So that might be a sign as to this person still, and it's not that you have to stop. But, we've seen relationships like that where one person really knows who they are. They won't know what the next step is. And that other person is a little bit hesitant. And honestly, the best thing for them, like some of the couples, is to not be together because they're not on the same page. Because either one person's holding back, it goes back to the pace setting. One person's really holding back, waiting, but the other person is trying to fulfill something maybe they're not supposed to. Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely depends on, I believe, the couple and the people that are coming into the conversation. But there's a lot of, at least with the couples that know who they are, I think the earlier, the better.
The earlier, the better.
Yeah.
Yes. Because you already know what you are looking for.
Yeah.
So when you see, I'm looking for white. I found it.
Yes.
White is looking for black. Oh, we are together.
Yes.
And then you start the conversation and take it there. But like we are talking about, both must be in agreement. It shouldn't be a cohesive thing that I'm on this level 4, you are level 1, and I'm trying to force you to come along.
Yes.
We both have to be on level 4, heading towards the same goal. And so then you start the conversation and see where this is leading to. So it's very important.
Yeah, I think I'll put my agreement behind that 100%. Earlier the better. If you know that, let's say you meet somebody and there are people in your life who are further down the trail than you. Maybe they've only been married a year, but they have some commonalities with you. Or maybe they've been married for 15 years. And that's what we found in our life, is we were married and we live our marriage very just, this is who we are. We love people, we enjoy hanging out with people, and we found younger couples and people that were dating and some people that were trying to, moving towards engagement, reaching out to us saying, hey, would you kind of be a mentor to us? Would you, disciple us? Would you share your life with us? And for us, change happens in the context of small table relationships. So sitting around our our kitchen table is where we do a lot of our coaching and where we do a lot of our mentoring. I will cook a dinner, and then we'll sit down and we'll share dinner. And
Because he likes to cook.
I love it.
Side note. Back to our strengths.
That's the sixth love language for me.
It is.
And so for me, what came out of that time was realization that, like I think Dr. W, you so adept, put it so well, that if someone's at a 4 and someone else is at a 1, you're already unequally yoked.
Yeah.
You're already out of balance.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that the 1 can't progress or the
To
4
Mm-hmm.
come back a little bit without diminishing who they are as a person.
Yeah.
So you're not compromising who you are, and I want to be really clear on that.
Yeah.
But you
Mhm,
kind
there
of
must
you
be a
meet
match.
both ways.
Yes.
But there has to be a desire for growth. There has to be a desire for accountability. There has to be a desire to go in the same direction. So most likely the person who's the 1 is not going to be going in the same direction as a 4. And that's where I want to tie it back to, you're probably looking at the wrong aspects for the, you're looking at the 6-pack or the,
The Bentley.
whatever.
Not that that's bad.
No, I don't wanna-
Sometimes it's all there.
Amen.
Like the whole package is great, but sometimes you gotta
dig a little bit
you
deeper
gotta dig a
sometimes.
little bit. And so I think early, often, and with kind of multiple viewpoints. So it shouldn't just be one person that you're seeking counsel from. It should be, if you're in a church, your pastor, a coach, a mentor, maybe a professional therapist. But then I think also, kind of to piggyback onto that, is for us, it keeps coming back to this really this idea of values, vision, and mission. Those are central tenets of our coaching business. Is one of the first questions we ask couples that we're coaching and couples that we're working with is, what are your values? And you would be surprised. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised. It's a question that not many people think about. But when we start to ask those questions and we ask them to dig deep and to present them, and we have had relationships that we've been coaching people, and they realize that we're not supposed to be together.
Through those conversations.
And it wasn't that we told them anything. They just have this realization that we're not on the same page, and they're friends to this day, and they value one another and all this other stuff. So I think for us, those conversations are cornerstone conversations. They're not just, we should do it. They're necessary to growth.
And I'll add one more component. I think that they need to be honest. So I think there's a lot of times people hold back. And if you are honest from the beginning, then that growth will happen. If you are not honest, then you will move forward. And honesty at some point is going to come up in the relationship. And so that is the thing that I would challenge people as well, is just be as honest as you can with where you're at, because you will be blessed, or you will have the discovery of, we're supposed to be together, or we're not supposed to be together.
And I remember even on this, maybe I want to share my story, like those times that I was dating and courtship leading to marriage. One of the things that I was also very careful about is meeting somebody who both of you are heading towards the same direction. And also somebody who is supportive. You have to be supportive of their vision, and they should in turn be supportive of your vision. And one of the things that I used to do to weed out the young men who had the boldness to come, I'll tell you, that time I was at the Polytechnic, and that was a long way to go. So some of them, when you come, I see you are all over, you are very interested, enthusiastic, and we'll talk a little bit, and then I would say that, but one thing I will be doing is that right now I'm at the Polytechnic, but I want to go to school and one day become a doctor, and this and this and this. And for some of them, this alone. From that day, they see you at church, They wouldn't even say hello.
Yes.
They are no more interested.
They're looking past you.
Oh, yeah.
I
They-
think
they-
so. My finger's stuck in chairs.
Hey,
And they are
oh.
like, they just go.
Yeah.
So I made sure that
Mhm.
because I didn't want the situation where you've gotten into a relationship, and then because back home, like I said, we have the cultural issue that
Yes.
the men feel I'm
Yeah.
the boss.
Yep.
So if I tell you can't go to school,
Mhm.
and that's it. And I've counseled lots of couple, some even have divorced
Mhm.
over, well, I want to go further my education.
Yes.
And the husband is like, choose between me or school.
Mm.
Wow.
And then she's like, I'm choosing school.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't want to be married to you anymore.
Wow.
So right from the beginning,
Yes.
Yeah.
have the conversations
Yes.
and be honest.
Yes.
Like you
Yes, be honest. I went on
Yeah.
a date with a guy
said.
whose questions to me were, well, why are you trying to go back to school if you're trying to get married? What's the point of that? We talked and I was like, like you said, I was tired, so I asked for help. And I was just like, so what if, I worked and I came home and maybe like I needed, he was like, why would I do that? That's your job. Needless to say.
There wasn't a second
There was no
date.
progression.
No. And he made me pay for my food. So he was
Oh
just
my.
like, yeah. I think after that conversation, he was like, she's not the one for me.
Yeah.
I had the burger, she had pasta. So
Yeah.
let's just
Split
split the
check.
check.
Oh my.
But even this is just, I think it's so important. And a lot of times, like relationships or what you see is what shapes you. I've seen my parents being married, being divorced, and even the good or the bad of what shapes you and everything. And I know one conversation and one of the questions that came up a lot was who handles the finances within a relationship. I remember asking my pastors this question, and my co-pastor, she said, pastor, her husband, he handles it. They have one account, everything is together. And, but she said, he's never given me a reason not to trust him. And so since they've been together, that's his strong suit. That's what he does. And he makes it work. Their oldest daughter, she's married. It's like we have a, account together. We have separate accounts, but it's not kept away from each other. He has access. I have access.
Yes.
I've also talked to other people who's just like, no, we have separate accounts and we just have something for the house. And finances is a very tricky thing.
Huge.
And I think, a lot of people, again, you're growing up, you're seeing your parents,
Yeah.
either, your mom being mishandled or your dad not having and your mom having that role. And so when it comes down to finances, how do you handle that in a relationship? I mean, married. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like that's very,
Yeah.
that's tough because you have people who say like, if that's your strong suit, like, I'm really good with like bills and like budgeting, so I take care of it. Okay. And then you have some people who's just like, no, I'm the man. So the man does this. And it's just like, how does that conversation go?
That is a weighty question.
Yeah, it is.
Loaded.
Yeah, that is loaded.
But it is important.
It is important
Extremely
because
Yeah.
I think it was the Marriage Institute, if I remember correctly, who did this survey. It's probably about 8 to 10 years ago now. That about 50% of divorces are because of financial decisions, and when it boils down to is about $500, a discrepancy of $500 here or there.
Wow.
Because they couldn't pay for a car payment, they couldn't pay their rent, they couldn't,
Yeah.
and it was about $500.
Yeah.
And so in our relationship, so Emily
Tell her
was,
story.
yeah, Emily is a math major and she's wicked smart. Okay. I was a philosophy and theology major, so my side of the brain is much different than hers. I operate out of one side, she operates out of the
I
other
like
side.
spreadsheets.
And she loves spreadsheets. So we came into marriage. It was probably the first 3 or 4 years. We had separate accounts, and bills weren't getting paid. And it's not that we were hiding money from one another. It was just like it was tough to get money from. And so
It was a mess.
we combined. It was a mess. It was
Yeah.
because there are emotions tied to finances. There are emotions tied to money, family, culturally, societally, all these other things. Gender understandings. So we combined and we started our journey towards understanding what it meant to operate out of our strengths.
Yes.
So we're going to fast forward a few years, and we made some good decisions and some bad decisions. But about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now,
Yeah,
right
just about
after
2 years
right
ago.
after our second son was born, we sat down, and Emily just kind of set it out. She had set up this Excel spreadsheet with tabs. Okay, not just a spreadsheet, but tabs. And she laid it out like, this is our monthly budget, this is our debt, this is this, this is this, this is our investments, this is all this. And I'm sitting there going, wow, man. And it probably took her 5 minutes. I mean, she just boom.
Math
Okay,
major.
10. Yeah, maybe.
But I think it's important is I created a visual
Yes.
that was appealing, right?
And what it did for me is now I saw the whole picture.
yeah.
That it's not just about a biweekly paycheck or a monthly paycheck. It's about legacy.
Yeah.
That's good.
And debt crushes legacy.
Mhm.
So for us,
Yep.
we had made some bad decisions,
Yep.
and God had rescued us.
Very much so.
Okay. And in his benevolent, just his favor towards us, his love towards us,
Yes.
said, I got you. Okay. and really brought us to a place where we had to realize that stewardship was really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So we started making different decisions. And one of the first decisions we made was tithing. So we just set that aside. That's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And then so what we do with the rest is on a monthly basis, she set up this spreadsheet, and it's so intelligently done and so simple that I literally can open up the Excel spreadsheet and on a minute-to-minute basis, I know where we're at in the moment, but I also know where we're headed in the future.
Yeah.
And we've paid off a couple credit cards, we've paid off a car,
That's awesome.
and that happened because we went from being two individuals
Yes.
managing money to a team
Stewarding it.
and stewarding it and realizing I am not a spreadsheet guy. I mean, my budget would probably be written
Oh, my
down in
goodness.
ink,
Lord have
pencil
mercy.
and paper, and I'd give it to her, and we'd do this every month. You know, she's like, no, we are not doing that. And she set up this. It's really great, and it's a template that we've shared with other couples to say this is something to start from.
Yeah.
And
If they don't have something.
if they don't have something, and so for us, it came back to stewardship and budget.
Yeah.
And we live within our means. And there are times that we're out of our means if we want to go on an extra date or we want
Right.
to buy a present for somebody else, because generosity is one of our values.
Yeah.
But we realize that, I gotta take that from somewhere else.
Yes. Yes.
So once we started doing that, I would say that our
Oh my goodness.
conversations about money became always
Yes.
positive,
Yes.
and the arguments about money became almost non-existent.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's still times where like, come on, what are we doing?
What?
and it's not in the sense
Yeah.
of judgment, but it's
Right.
just like,
Right.
I thought we said we wanted this. Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we got to put that on hold.
Yeah.
And that came about when we realized that for her strength is that. And this is one of the places where I step back and go, you take the lead here because you have that mindset. You've got to paint a really broad picture and a really clear vision for me. And then I'm in.
Yeah.
And when I'm in, you watch out because I'm like Juggernaut. I'm going to put my head down and we're going. You know, and I'm going to run through walls. I'm going to take out
I'm all in.
buildings,
Yeah.
and you know, I'll turn green and me Hulk, you know, and go bust stuff down. But that happened because we had to learn lessons.
Yeah.
So don't discount the lessons either.
Yeah.
Don't discount the small beginnings.
Yeah.
But start somewhere.
Yeah.
Start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I would add is one of the tools for us also was Financial Peace University through Dave Ramsey. And so I know some people are fans, some people aren't, and that's okay. The reason I say it was a tool was because it got us talking.
Yep.
And so again, back to the communication piece, like it was one of those things where initially we had the separate accounts. I looked at the money only. Scott it wasn't a trust thing. He just had no idea what was going on. And then I was just frustrated and said, fine, you take it over. And then he was looking at it. His eyes were open. He's like, oh, I see what you're saying. But I was like, I'm over it. I don't want to be involved. So it was when we came together
Yes.
and we were able to find, okay, like, yes, I created this template and I'll keep it up because again, I like the numbers, but he has the buy-in to look at it.
Yep.
So it's the combination of what we're doing in order to be able to have those conversations and the consistency of conversation as well. So it's not just now we're 6 months ahead and we don't know what's happening and we can't pay a bill, or we're surprised by something that's coming up, where if we're consistently talking about it, then there are less surprises as well. And so I guess that's the only, component that I would add to.
Yeah, I just think for me, finances are like soccer. It's great if you have the offense and defense.
Or
If you have the
football.
striker, football. If you have the striker and the midfielders and the fullbacks and the defensive backs, that's great. But if you don't have a goalie,
Yeah.
you're going to lose.
Yeah.
And the budget for us was the goalie.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
The budget for us was the goalie because it showed us what our limits were.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can go score often.
Right.
We can score as much as we want
Because you
to
have a target.
because we have a target.
Yes.
And that was what a budget
Yeah.
and stewardship did for us.
And then let me add one more. I'm sorry. I have one more thing, because finances are huge.
Yeah.
I would say the other piece of it was like truly giving it back to God.
Mhm.
So again, that shift from I'm controlling, I'm
It's my
managing,
money.
it's my money, to stewardship is what allowed us to actually, because we had a lot of family ties, a lot of fear, a lot of emotions that were tied to financial things that we could only be freed from when we gave it back to God at that point. And that is the other reason that I would say our conversations around money are less stressful, because we come to it from a place of peace and understanding that ultimately God is our provider. And so even if things aren't, then again, my numbers, analytical controlness, I have to let some of it go. But it's so good to then look back and be like, wow, God, like that's why we have the tabs, because we go back and we reflect on each month to say, look at how you provided.
Yeah.
Even in times where, a
didn't feel like
pandemic
it.
or
Right,
just
right.
stuff that shouldn't make sense. And then that becomes part of our story because we point back to him as well.
That's good.
Yeah,
Dr. Evelyn?
Yeah. And I think what I will add to that is the trust
Yes.
and growth.
So good.
Yes.
Yeah, the trust and growth. And sometimes we are pushing for something too soon. You heard Scott say that it took them about 4 years to get to that comfort spot to say, okay, let's begin to look at this. But sometimes you get newlyweds who are pushing,
Yes.
it's my way or the highway. And that becomes the bone of contention in the house. But I think that it's very, very important that as married couples, you don't also lose your individuality.
Yes.
Because I know situations where the couple put everything together and it's like you have to justify every reason why this penny has to be taken.
Sure.
That maybe I'm sending money to my mom and then the husband is like, why do you need to send money to your mom? You sent some last week.
Yeah.
So why are you sending some this week? And that becomes a fight.
Yeah.
So because of some of those things, some couples will have the centralized budget
Yes.
for the house, but they also allow that flexibility that you can have some pocket money.
Yeah.
And with that, I do what I want.
Yes.
Yes.
And for us ladies,
Yes.
we go to the shop,
Hey.
we buy what we want.
Come on.
And we don't need to come and account. Why do you have new shoes when the car is not paid? That's my pocket money.
That's right.
I do what I want with
That's
it.
right.
See, so
Yeah.
we should make it work.
Yes.
And the central thing is love.
Yes.
Everything must be done in love.
Yeah.
Let everything be done in love and in decency.
Yes.
To
Yeah,
the
that's such a
glory
good
of
word.
God.
Amen.
So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I really, I'm just hearing a lot of communication is very key.
Yes.
Understanding the heart of the person, knowing where they're coming from and where, and sometimes it's, again, goes back to having that third party
Yes.
there to like, hey, they're not attacking you, or they feel like, I remember
Yep.
one of my brother's friends, he was having this conversation with his girlfriend, and his concern was she doesn't want to have one bank account when they get together, and he's interested in like proposing, But that's one thing that for him, he's just like, how, like
Yeah.
that's what he's seen in his household. But through our conversation, found out that her mom and her dad, that wasn't a great situation for her. So she is like, I always want to have money on me because that's the advice she's received from her mom. So I had to let him understand it's not that she doesn't trust you, but that is a situation that she can't relinquish that control and that tie from. So you have to either give her, time, and she's not saying like, this is my money, we're not going to spend it. She's just like, I'm going to put some here, but I'm going to have some here for me. And just gradually having that, come to that place of like trust and loyalty in a relationship. But a lot of it that I'm hearing is communication, communicating and just understanding where each other's coming from.
Yes.
I think that's really big.
Yeah.
And just being flexible and that willingness to, because like I said, there are things for me that culturally, like I used to joke with my mom and say, oh, I never want to marry somebody from Ghana or traditional Ghana, because I just felt like certain things they're not going to budge. But then when I went back home and, meeting certain people, it's just like, oh, it's not that bad. Yes, culturally we have some differences or some things that you may not agree with, but you meet and you talk to people and you realize that not everybody thinks that way or not everybody has that mindset. So I think that's really good. I would say, 34 years you were married, 15 plus years you guys are married. What in your story would you tell somebody who is either dating, who is single, dating, and who is married and, in their different journey? What is something from your journey that you would share with them, or some advice that you could give them? Because relationship is hard. I saw somebody's picture on Instagram and the caption is, marriage is hard, choose wisely. And I think, the point of some of these conversations is to, a lot of times you're just like, how do you know? And that was a fear for me in dating. Like I'm trying to control this and not have this. And God really had to deal with that with me because I felt like, okay, once I can check off these things, not to say the vision and the mission is not important, but how do you choose wisely? And if you felt like, getting to a point where you feel like, man, I'm in a bad marriage or I'm in a bad relationship, what advice could you give somebody in these different stages from your experience? So anybody can just...
I'm not going first.
All of the above.
Wow. I really think that this whole conversation, some of the central tenets have always come back to, or we've come back to central tenets. Communication is key. Not diminishing who you are, not canceling yourself out to make the other better or bigger or anything else like that. And I think for me, let's just using that continuum that you set, single to, dating to engaged to married, to the single, I would say, work harder on your character than you do on your career.
Wow.
Because your career will go, but your character you'll carry with you.
Yeah.
So work harder on your character than your career. To the people who are just kind of entering into those dating relationships, I think I would say two things: have fun, lighten up.
Yes.
Okay, lighten up. It's
I agree.
just have fun, and then kind of in tandem with that, it would be, this is a great testing ground to see if you're in the same place, going in the same direction.
Yeah.
And if you're not, your goal is not to get that other person to go with you.
Yeah.
Your goal is to be who you are as a whole human being, first and foremost. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that says, I'm okay, let's be friends. This is not going to work. The verse escapes me right now for some reason, but how shall two go together unless they agree?
Yeah.
I think that's Amos. I think it's Amos. And so, you can't. 4s and 1s don't match. To the engaged couple, I will start with this: have fun. Have fun. Do it right, but have fun. And then to them, I would say, you need to be talking more about your present and your future than your past.
Yeah.
The past matters.
Yes.
I think the old axiom, those who forget their past are doomed to repeat it. Okay. So it can define us positively or negatively. Choose to let it define you positively. So for me, money was an issue because my parents were divorced and my dad handled finances and my mom didn't know anything about finances. It was a cultural thing at the time. She then had to work 3 or 4 jobs at a time, which meant my brother and I were raising ourselves. And she did a great job. She's a wonderful woman and an amazing woman. And I had made a vow. I had said, that's never going to happen. And then it ended up happening. And that's what happens when you make those things, by the way.
Yes.
If you make a judgment, 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up living that out.
Right.
So I would say to the engaged couple is don't live out of your past. Let your past talk to you about where you're at in the present, but then be future and forward focused. So build your future, not your past. And then to the couple that are married, I would say, have fun. And then the second thing I would say is, if you're not where you want to be, it's the old axiom you hear, you're not a tree, then move, change, make different decisions. And if you don't know how, find a coach, find a therapist, find a pastor, find good friends, mentors who can mirror for you and who can disciple you, who can pastor you, who can love you, who can minister to you, who can pray for you, because maybe you need some healing. So have fun, and then build your future. Create your legacy. Leave that inheritance to your children's children. That's not money. That's part of it. I want my sons to grow up never feeling deficient.
Yes.
That's a legacy for them. So we're breaking generational stuff forward and backward. That's the legacy I'm leaving them. They're going to know who they are. We are firmly planting within them. Like my oldest son wants to be richer than Tony Stark. That's his context. He's a Marvels guy, So he has no idea that Tony Stark isn't real.
That's okay.
He just sees what he does, and he's like, I want to be richer than him. And I asked him, I said, why? And because there's people that need what I can give them. And I'm looking around going, who told you that, man? And I'm like, wow, maybe we're doing okay. He's 8. That's legacy.
Yeah.
So because we've decided, we decided this before the birth of our first son, that we were moving forward.
Yeah.
We were done dwelling. Abraham settled in Ur, but that's not where God called him. God called him to go forward.
Right.
And it's when he went forward to the future, then God said, from you, look up. And from you, more than these are coming. That's the word to us. So if you think the Bible is irrelevant today, it's not. Because the same word that he spoke to Abraham, he speaks to you as a married couple, engaged couple, dating couple, single. Don't settle, get up and move.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say.
Awesome. That's good.
I can't follow that. Wow.
That was really good.
Wow. Amen.
She's wiser than she gives herself credit for.
Oh, that was really good.
That was
That's the
really,
end.
I know,
Thank you for joining
period.
us.
No. I mean, I guess the only thing, he did an amazing job breaking it out. If I have to go back to say anything, I guess I would just, the encouragement that I would want to give people, no matter what stage you're in, is that you are created with purpose.
Yes.
on purpose for something. And so it does not matter if you're single, married, whatever stage it's at, like there is something that you are called to do.
Yep.
And that hope is always there
Yep.
because we have been through times where we
Yeah.
did not have that hope. So we can sit here, we can smile, we can engage, we can interact. But let me tell you, there were times that it was tough,
Yeah.
but that's God. And when he was central to our life, that we honestly, were able to move forward because we saw purpose and understanding and hope. And so I guess that is the biggest thing that I would tell people is that, wherever you're at, that God is good, that God is love, and that there's purpose.
Yeah.
Ellen? I guess what I would say to the beginners, I love to pray. So what I would tell the beginners is that pray about your spouse.
Yes.
Don't just get carried away with outward looks.
Yes.
Go to God in prayer. He's so concerned about your future and have him guide you. Because the Bible says that a good and a prudent wife or husband comes from the Lord.
Yes.
So let him guide your steps and allow God to direct your paths. And he will not lead you astray. The other thing too that I would say to those who are maybe engaged and things like that, as we have shared, get to know each other, build your friendship. Build your friendship. At this stage, maybe you are not engaging in sex. That is if the Bible is your standard and you are going by it. The Bible does not endorse premarital sex. So before here comes the bride, you cannot do that. But build your friendship. Because one of the things that will sustain the marriage is the friendship once you live together. Build your friendship, build your, like Scott said, your character, your tolerance level, and things like that. And then to the married, what I would say is that stay on top of everything. It doesn't matter if you've been married for 50 years.
Yes.
You have to keep doing the very same things you did from day one.
Yes.
The courting that you were doing, the special getaways that you were doing, the I love you and the notes that you were writing, the helping around the house. You don't stop, whether you've been married for 100 years.
Yes.
And like we said, two can play that game.
Yes.
And marriage is between two people. So when either pair of the partners decide not to play their role, then the marriage will go down.
Yes.
I mean, God cannot go beyond our will.
Yes.
So if he tells us, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, and the other party is not doing what he's supposed to do, it's just a matter of time. And what I will also say is that we are created for a higher purpose.
Yes.
Scott started off with the quote from Paul, that Paul said, maybe become like me. But if you know you cannot contain yourself, marry, because God doesn't want there to be fornication.
Yes.
But sometimes, like we are saying, you are in a relationship and you see that this relationship is killing you. The other party has come to that place. I will not go for counseling. I will not do the things that I'm supposed to do. They don't even care anymore. They are not home. And it's eating you up. Don't exchange your life for a man. Always put God first. And even when it comes to that place, the Lord, do I leave or stay? As I said from the beginning, begin with prayer and end with prayer. Let the Lord have the final say at the beginning and at the end. And honor him, whether single, married, or divorced. Very important.
May I add something else?
Yeah, I have one more thought too. I don't know if that's
See,
good or bad.
And this is
You
how
spur us on.
you are an encourager.
Yes.
And when I was on the debate team, extemporaneous speech was my forte. So I get ideas and then my brain just goes. I want to piggyback on something that Dr. Evelyn eloquently said. You have to have a standard when it comes to sex. And I think that as Christians, our standard is not before marriage. And we want to say, well, that's just Puritan, that's just old fashioned, that doesn't, I can, everything else I can do, but that one, check your motives. Because when you have sex with somebody else, you are giving part of yourself away. And we use the analogy in coaching that when we're born, you get $100. Okay, everybody has $100. Everybody's the same. Okay, and you're exchanging those dollar bills throughout life. And when you're having sex outside of marriage, I don't care how healthy your relationship is, you are always giving more than you're receiving. I don't care how healthy you are. You can be the healthiest person in the world because it's unequal. Because there's always some underlying motives. I want to do this because I want to be accepted. I'm going to do this because I want to get ahead. So there's always some ulterior motives. So what ends up happening is I'm going to come from relationships. So I come in with 100 and let's say I just have 2 partners before marriage. But those 2 partners, I got $5 back, but I exchanged $25. So I'm $20 in the hole for each one. That's $40. Now I only have $60. And the person that I come to had no relationship. And it doesn't make them better or worse. They just chose differently. They come in with, maybe they have $90 because we exchange money and it happens. There's some unequalness there. And so what ends up happening now is when we enter the marriage covenant, there's some inequality when it comes to sex. And what ends up happening is that's where some of our sexual dysfunction comes from. So if you get married and all of a sudden sex on the marriage night isn't what you expected, who are you going to blame? Are you going to blame the person who's had more sex or less sex? You're going to blame the person who's had less sex, which is unfair because it takes 2 to tango. And so I think that if you're having sex outside of marriage, my encouragement to you would be find some mentors, some help, some therapy, whatever you need, some coaching or whatever, and make some decisions to value yourself, to wait. And then I think kind of the second thing that was kind of, rumbling through my mind when Dr. Evelyn was talking is just this sense of, it comes back to communication. It always comes back to communication for us. These are conversations that I'm having in a healthy setting with my mentors, and they're sharing, or I'm whatever in a coaching experience or whatever. It's one of the things we do in our coaching is we talk about sex because God created sex and he created it to be excellent. And we are not ashamed. And that's the key. So much shame in our context is tied to sex. And when I say context, I say in the Christian world. I want to remove that shame because God said, be fruitful and multiply. But he also said at the end, it's not just good, it's very good. That's when Adam and Eve were together. Okay, it's very good. Okay, that didn't change at the fall. He still says it is very good. But it's very good when it's come from a position of covenant. Because now, Emily and I have been married for 15 years. when we do have sex, it's from a place of equality with
Yeah.
one another.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to impress her. She's not trying to impress me. We can be fully ourselves.
Yeah.
And I will just tell you, if I can be honest, sex outside, sex inside, I would give sex inside I would elevate that to an ultimate standard
Yeah.
because we're actually exchanging ourselves in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's really paramount to, that's what I would say to everybody.
To everybody.
If you're single, dating, engaged, married, maybe you're married and your sex life isn't what you want, get help.
Yeah.
Talk to your pastor, talk to a therapist,
Yeah.
get a coach,
Yeah.
read a book. There are some great books out there. Do everything, do all of those things.
My mom always says that. I'm like,
Do all of those things because there's so much shame, so much emotion tied to that. We need to get rid of that so that we can be whole.
that's good.
Wow.
That's good.
See, you had to read the book.
Oh my God.
I know.
When we married, I was a virgin. So most of the things, even before the wedding, I had to read
Yes.
and learn and things like that. And then, so when we were coming to do this, she's like, don't go and talk about your book reading. So you said,
I'm a book.
I know. To see it just came out.
Right, you didn't say that's what we were laughing.
I didn't say that. The coach said, read a book.
And I have a library.
If you need advice or help.
Yes.
So good. I know
good.
you wanted to say something.
I wanted to add one. It doesn't have to do with either of them. Just talked about the thing that came to my mind, or the memory in terms of advice. Just find somebody who also makes you better.
Yeah.
And like, I think that sometimes people are like, how do I know? You know, there's that question and all these things. And for me, when I saw not only like myself, like in that moment with Scott, like before we were dating or engaged and in our relationship, then it was almost like I could see a glimpse into the future, and I could see myself being 70 and having just amazing conversations. And honestly, it has surpassed like anything that I could have imagined.
Yeah.
And so when you're willing to die to yourself, to be vulnerable to all of those things, you can be truly enhanced by your spouse. And so I think that's just the other thing that I would add in terms of advice is be whole, but know that in growth and change, that those are good things. And that we truly, we believe that is part of salvation. We believe that marriage is part of sanctification. It is not just happiness, but there's a book that it's about holiness. And that's really, really true. And so I'm eternally grateful that I have somebody who supports me and sharpens me and makes me better. And I know that I can do the same thing for
Yes, she
him.
does.
And so that's the other thing that I would say when we talk about character and all those other things, just find that person that's really, you're good by yourself. It's not that you're, but you can be even better with somebody that is by you as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because the Bible says two are better
Then what?
than
Or
one.
3 strands is not easily broken.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so good. We just have breaking news with the sex question.
I had a feeling.
It just
And it just came in.
It just came through the chat. We heard that. This is so good. How can you get to know somebody without knowing them? Because you have some people who really feel, like being a virgin in this day and age is like very outdated and like, why? Like people will literally ask, like, are you okay? What's wrong with you? Like,
Sure.
why are you choosing this? And people pride themselves in having like multiple partners or just being sexually experienced.
Yeah.
But how would you get to know the person you're dating? And that's a concern for people. Like if they can't kiss, like that, I don't want them. Or, but we know that marriage is more than that. We know the relationship is more than that. But that is also important. Like you said, God created it. He said it's very good. Amen. And so for someone who is dating who might struggle with, okay, I know what the Bible says, but how do I know this person, you know, this car is for me? How do I know that this, you know, without test driving, I'm just
Yeah.
That's a
signing
great
on the
analogy.
dotted line,
Yeah,
you know?
that's a great, and it's a very common analogy.
So
Yeah. Dr. Evelyn?
Read a book. No. I'm just
I guess we must trust our lives to God. The other time I was telling my daughter that it takes faith to marry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You need faith to marry. To meet that young guy who doesn't really have much to his name, but you believe that things are not going to be where they are.
Yes.
So you must trust God that we are in this journey together. I believe that Adam and Eve didn't test drive. And so they were green, first couple ever, no books, nothing.
they were the first 90-day fiance.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. They had to
Literally.
figure things out.
Right.
So I believe that marriage is a learning environment,
Yes.
and the couples learn and grow together.
Yes.
Because when it comes to
100%.
sex and all of that, you wouldn't know the likes and dislikes of your spouse without being with the person. But in the context outside marriage, it's like you've lit a fire that can burn both of you. That's it, because Paul said it's better to marry than to burn. Using the symbolic word, what burns? It's fire. And of course, Proverbs says that for the adulterous man, he said it's like putting coals of fire on your bosom. It's going to burn you. It will burn your legacy and all of that. So those are not things you play with. So you learn together. And if you are having difficulties, we are blessed in this day and age. We have sex therapists. We have all kinds of therapists. Go see them and read a book.
Read a book. And we've got several.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can read.
Because sometimes, you know, what reading does is that there are some hard questions that when even you are sitting in front of a coach, you are shy to ask.
Yes.
But if you get a really good book,
Oh my Lord.
yes, written by a therapist, all the hard questions that you are shy to ask is answered.
Yes.
And it's in the privacy of your home. I'm not talking about pornography. Good book by a trained therapist. And sometimes we have very good Christian authors out there.
Absolutely.
Holy Ghost filled, anointed
Yes.
for what they are doing. That's their gifting.
No, I agree.
So it's a learning process. The wedding night doesn't spell the rest of the marriage.
Yes.
It can get great like wine.
Yes.
See?
Yes.
It gets better with age.
Yes.
Yeah.
See? It
I
gets
agree.
better.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Like it gets better with age, and
It gets
and
better.
guess what? I'm going to come back to communication.
Love it.
Because honestly, I think that, you know, for us, it got better when we actually were honest and communicated. And I think that sometimes we apply communication to all other areas of our life. But then we get to sex and we sometimes don't realize how influenced we are by culture, by movies, by all these other, and we realize that, oh, we're coming in with an incorrect expectation as well. So I think that it is something that gets better because if you're both willing to be honest and communicate and say what you want and all of those things as well. So that would be, I guess, how I'd answer that.
Yeah. No, I think those are great. I think for me, I think where the analogy of, you know, I'm going to test drive
The
a
test drive,
car.
yeah.
And it's a common analogy. I've heard it thousands of times. I think where that breaks down is that a car has many functions. It's not just transportation, although that's part of it.
That's good.
And I think when we pigeonhole sex as the marker of good relationship, then when it's bad,
Mm.
that means the relationship is bad.
Mhm.
And that's not a non sequitur. That's a direct thought. So when I can no longer satisfy my boyfriend, my girlfriend sexually, they're going to leave,
Mhm.
which leads to really dangerous things from the female and the male perspective. It doesn't, I think it's regardless of gender. What we've seen in the couples that we've worked with and the people that we've spent time with, and even in our own life, is that when we realized that sex in the context of knowing one another
Mhm.
is rich. So how do we get to know each other without sex? I think it's easier than it sounds, because you had mentioned earlier that, relationships are hard. They're hard if you make them hard. It's all a mindset thing. That doesn't mean they're not challenging
Or they're not work.
or they're not work. If you come into this thinking you're not going to work, you need to stop dating right now.
Yeah.
Get some help. Because one of the ways that you get to know each other is, I think it was Muhammad Ali said, I'm going to look at you when you treat a waiter, and if you treat that waiter bad, then how are you going to treat me? Because if you can't treat somebody who can't do anything for you well, how are you going to treat you're going to treat somebody who can do everything for you differently. So I want to look for the person who, so I get to know your character first.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put myself in context to get to know your character. So we do that through dating. We do that through the context of conversations and like movies. So I'm a movie guy. I go to movies. I go to movies
Not
by
anymore,
myself.
but no.
Not anymore. I go to movies by myself,
Yes,
and
sir.
I read books. I listen to Audible. I'm a podcast junkie. All these other things, and so my wife knows me by my likes and dislikes.
Yeah.
So there's another thing. I just think that it breaks down when we come to that place of saying, I can't really know you if I don't know you sexually. I would counter that with this. You don't know them at all.
Right.
If all you know them is sexually.
Right.
Because
Yep. Agree.
I can be whoever I want sexually. And I don't have to share honesty with you at all. At all.
That's really good.
But if I'm honest from the beginning, and this is, I think this ties back to the question of, how do you know you're in love, or what is love? Is when I started making decisions that made Emily a priority.
Yeah.
So how I treated her, how I talked to her, what I did for her, not that I was always 100%, but I put forth the effort. There were things at that point that were off the table. I couldn't do those things. And so in the context, just in this specific context of sex, if I'm looking out for the interests of my partner first, male and female, then the best thing you can do is wait. Because you're not giving all of you if you don't. You're only giving a part. And the part that you're giving, even if you're extremely healthy, the part that you're giving is tainted. Because it has to be. Because there's always some ulterior motives engaged in there. And blind spots are a problem for humanity. Everybody, I don't care who you are. Everybody has blind spots. And so I think for how do you get to know somebody, it's work. It's a challenge. And in this world that we live in right now, I think it's maybe double, triple, maybe quadruple challenge. Because you're not going out. You're not putting yourself in contexts And so you have to be really creative. But that's where, like, I remember when we first met, or our first kind of interaction with one another, when I expressed my feelings to her, we sat outside and we talked until like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And we talked about dreams and visions and in that moment, and I knew, I don't believe in love at first sight. I think it's an illusion, but I knew,
Amen.
I knew when I saw Emily that I was going to marry her. In fact, I told a friend, I said, that's the one I'm going to marry. Not because I fell in love at first sight. That wasn't it. I saw in her the traits and the character, the attributes and the principles that made me want to be a better man.
Awesome.
And I said to myself about her, if that's the case, then there are things that I'm going to do. Not that we always did it right. Not that we always were perfect. And when we weren't, there was always grace.
Yeah.
Not that we took that for granted, but there was always grace. And so I would fundamentally say, back to the character piece, work on yourself. It's better to not date than to date and to put yourself in circumstances like that. Because I truly believe, and I'm not prude. I'm not a prude. I'm not naive. I am not, there's none of that in me. But I truly believe that if you put your best foot forward, the person that meets you in that place has already done the work to prepare themselves for you. Doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that you won't struggle. Doesn't mean that you won't be challenged. What it means, and for me, it goes back to the team. So if I'm a team, if we're a team, we're going to make decisions for the team, not for the individual. And I fundamentally think sex outside of marriage is selfish. So that's what I would say about that.
I'm gonna add one more comment about just sex in general, and Scott kind of alluded to this as well, just in the car analogy, but sex is so much more than just the physical. So again, like the how do you know, if you've connected spiritually, emotionally, like all these other areas of your life, but the physical part is just a small component of it.
Yep.
And so I think that's the other piece as well. It's that's the trust,
Yes.
right? So the trust that, okay, I'm going to trust physically, we're going to be fine because all these other areas we've connected and in those other areas. And that's the beauty of it all, is that it's not just a physical act. It's everything else.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. So as we wrap up, if you could say anything to your younger self in regards to love and relationship, what would you say? You know, it's just so deep.
That is a deep one.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Like, because we've said it a little bit already. If I could say anything to my younger self, it would be the wholeness piece first. It would be know who you are before you start seeking out relationship, and know yourself in Christ first. Because there are certain things that God fulfills and certain expectations that God fulfills that my spouse was never meant to fulfill. And so that would be like the first thing that I would definitely say to myself, in addition to what Scott's alluded to around character as well. That character really matters. It's really important because that extends beyond everything. Like it really bleeds over into every area. But you know, if you lose a job, if you do it's your identity. In a sense, you know, within obviously God as well, but character really matters.
Yeah, I think what I would say, if my younger self was sitting in front of me today and I was able to communicate with that, you know, in those moments, the things that I would say is risk more. Character matters. Live by your values, which ties back to character for me. Love boldly, but not recklessly. And then I think that I can encapsulate that just in put a bow around that. Relationships aren't something. Relationships are everything. And the hallmark of a healthy relationship is vulnerability. So you have to be your most authentic self, even when you think someone's not going to understand you. You have to be vulnerable. And that's a dangerous place. One of our favorite authors and pastors says the most dangerous place you can be is in the center of God's will. And the reason that is because when you're in the center of God's will, you're authentic, you're vulnerable, you're reliant on something outside of yourself. You're exposed, you risk all of the things that I just mentioned. And if we take that into the context of relationships, those are the things that I would say to my younger self.
Those are very great. I was just absorbing everything. What I would say to my younger self is that don't go into marriage or relationship naive. Make sure you have all the knowledge. We spend years and years training for our careers and everything. But marriage is it's the most important thing at a point in your life that can make or break you. And sometimes, as you said, people are just reckless and they just jump into it. They just let their feelings lead them into it without any proper thinking, focused thinking through what the decision they are making. Spend time and read books. Understand what you are getting into. After you have built yourself, spend time. Learn about the what it all takes, because that will make you a better prepared person for the journey. And then the other thing too that I would say is that whilst you are in the marriage, don't ignore the red flags that you see. Because sometimes, because the Lord is in us, here and there, certain things may come up and you stumble upon some information, but sometimes you can just explain things away. And you give excuses why maybe, that's permissible. Because the Bible says that it's the little foxes that spoil the vine. So the red flags that you see, don't sweep them under the carpet. Make sure everything that needs to be set right, you set it right. And of course, we are doing this because of the young adults out there. We want you to succeed. We have our guests who are experts. They have dedicated themselves to share their story, so you will not fall where they fell, and you will go further than them.
Amen. That's
Take
exactly
advantage of that. Be a wise person. And then one thing too that I would also say is parental advice, or advice from people who genuinely love you. I read about how romantic love, the eros, or the playful love, how volatile it can be. And sometimes it's like somebody who is high on cocaine. So your mind is in cloud 9 and your feet is not touching the floor. But it's your loved ones who will observe from behind and say that, hey, we think that you must put this here, or maybe this is not good for you. Don't think that they are against you. It will help you if you will listen. I've had people, family members, walk up to me that, hey, maybe you told me this some 20 years back and I didn't listen, but you were right.
Wow.
And I have even forgotten, and they are trying to remind you. I said,
Yeah.
really? I said that? You say, yeah.
Yeah.
Because maybe you, in the spur of the moment,
Yeah.
some red flag might have come up. You may have seen something.
Yeah.
And so then you caution them. But hey, they are in love. They won't listen.
Yeah.
And so to my younger self, I would say, listen to the advice of your loved ones. Because in the multitude of
100%.
counsel,
Yes.
there is safety.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good. So good.
Man, this is so great. There's no more breaking news, by the way.
Not breaking news.
No, there's no more. Thank you, Scott and Emily, for joining us and just being a part of this conversation. I know I've learned a lot. I'm walking away with a lot, and those watching are also blessed.
I hope so.
Can you just share where we can find more about you guys and those who want to reach out for coaching and counseling can find?
Yeah. So our website is www.projectrootsandwings.com. You can also find us on Instagram at Project Roots and Wings. And that's the best way to get in touch with us, is either one of those two. Send us a DM through our Instagram page, or there's places to contact us through our website. And we're just, I think the word passion sometimes is overused. And so it can become a deflated word, but we're really passionate
We are.
about helping people who feel stuck get unstuck, for people who feel like Dr. Evelyn said, they're up here, but their feet aren't grounded, to help them find place to create roots.
Yeah. But then
And-
fly.
soar. And so reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to spend time with you, get to know your story. And so those are the two places that you can find us.
Awesome. And they also have a podcast.
We
Yes.
do.
Roots.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
So it's
Project
the
Roots
Project Roots and Wings
podcast.
Yep.
on
Yep.
Apple and Spotify.
Awesome. So please do follow them, reach out, and just allow God to be the center of your relationship, dating, single, married, and just, it's good to have help, to have that support and that mentorship. So never feel like you have to do it alone or it's a sin. That's a lie from the enemy. We know that God has placed people in our lives to help us and come alongside us. And he's able to work through anybody, and just allow God to heal that relationship. And so your relationship can bring glory to him. We are grateful you were able to join us in this conversation today. Please follow Dr. Evelyn Ministries on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Spotify, all the major platforms, Anchor, Google Play. You can find Dr. Evelyn Apple. Thank you. Dr. Evelyn Ministries podcast there as well. And all the information shared here will be provided in the description box below. So thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to see you in our next conversation.